Howdy, howdy. All right. We are officially underway with our first win for the year of 2022. So we're going to talk about winning your measurement plan. I'm going to take just a few extra seconds here, let everybody get through the waiting room. All right. Welcome to Lesson 1. We're going to do just a few quick housekeeping tips for those of you who have not been through this before. First, the way that this works is I'm going to kind of go through and you're going to hear me sort of pause and start and restart. Those pauses are in there on purpose just for our video editors to go through and be able to break this recording into the actual lessons and topics that we use. So if you've ever been through our WIN courses, you already know how that's organized and set up, and this is how it's done live, so you can get into that. Of course, the benefit of being here live is that we have a Q&A opportunity for those of you that are here live, so take advantage of that. If you want to ask questions, you can do them in two ways if you're here live. One, in the chat room. You can just put questions in the chat. Second way to do it is, of course, if you want to talk something out, share a screen, anything like that, we're happy to go through that. Just use the raise hand icon that's in Zoom, and then that lets us know that you've got a mic and want to talk things out, and we are absolutely wanting to do that as well if you want to. And of course, if you are watching the replay, as the vast majority do, all you need to do is to use the Ask an Instructor support that is inside the members area. Just make sure you reference this particular lesson as you're going through it, and we'll be sure to be able to get you those answers. The schedule. So today we are talking about the foundations of measurement planning. It's actually something we're also doing for our YouTube audience. We're going to give this one out. So hello to all of those that are on YouTube watching this. Tomorrow, at this exact same time, we're going to be doing the second lesson. So we're going to talk about, instead of the foundations, we're going to go a little bit more into a deep dive, specifically around gathering information and a process we call POD to go through and do that. That, of course, is not going to be on YouTube. So, but for Academy members, you'll be able to see all of that. And of course, everybody that's here live will have access to that as well. And then on Wednesday, I should say, lesson number 3, we're going to go through a 10-minute audit. We're going to teach you a 10-minute audit process. Kind of think, we talk a lot about in measurement marketing, we talk about good enough to get going. You come back and make it better later. The 10-minute audit is the good enough to get going version of an audit that at least gets you some basic steps so you can get progress, because progress is so important when it comes to measurement. I've seen a lot of setups go really poorly because they spend so much time making the perfect setup. They never actually get anything that they can use. And then they just lose resources, whether that's the boss coming to you and saying, no, we're done with this. It's taking too long, or you just get frustrated with it, with your own setup. So that's what the 10-minute audit's for. And then on Thursday, it'll be the final lesson of this particular WIN for Win Your Measurement Plan. And that's where we're going to go through the deep dive. That is, of course, the better version of the 10-minute audit, but much in-depth details. And we'll go through some specific tools that are also in the members area that you can take advantage of as well to guide your way. All right, so that is the schedule. Just again, a quick reminder for those of you who are coming in and out, joining us live on the Zoom call at the moment, for those members of the Academy. If you have to leave for whatever reason and you come back in, just give me a second or two to allow you through the waiting room. It might take you me a little longer to get you in there, only because, of course, I'll be teaching live when you do that. So just be patient, and I'll make sure that you definitely get back in. All right, let's go ahead and get officially underway. Win Your Measurement Plan. This is lesson number 1, measurement planning, the foundations. All right. When we think about the one thing, we're big on the one thing here at measurementmarketing.io, and we focus on one new idea. It's one new way of thinking about something, maybe one new tip or technique that you can put into action. You take that one thing and you practice that. That way you move from being exposed to a new skill to actually having the skill because you've practiced it, you've integrated it, right? So that's why this one thing is so important. Now, in today's lesson, we're going to, of course, talk about the framework, right, and pulling in the framework together. And let's just start with here. We're going to start with this because, of course, planning is foundational to the framework. So in the planning process, we have questions, informations, and actions. Then you move into your build. You have to plan before you build. Most businesses start the opposite. They start with their builds. They activate Google Analytics, it gets a bunch of data, and they try to use it. But there is no plan for it. And so they go into analytics, they get battered around like a cat bats around a piece of yarn. And then you just I'll come back to this in a few years later when I try to figure out what it's for. And that's because a plan goes wrong. So we're going to talk a lot of, obviously in this particular course, all about the planning process. Now remember, if this is your first time seeing the measurement marketing framework, what I would suggest to you is, as an Academy member, you have access to Win Your Measurement Marketing Framework, or Win the Measurement Marketing Framework, I believe it is called. So go in there and watch that first, because that explains the framework in all its different parts and pieces at the varying stages. We have the cave setups, you got your valley setups, you got your summit setups, and it explains each individual key of each individual step. right? The 3 steps, of course, being plan, build, and launch. So make sure you go through that if you have not already. Now, in terms of the 1 things from this particular lesson that we're going to focus on, really, it's going to be coming down to this. It's going to be coming down to this idea of planning, right? We need to make sure that we focus on the plan. You cannot use Google Analytics without a plan. You cannot use Tag Manager without a plan. You cannot use Data Studio without a plan. Now, that said, there are maybe you sitting on this call going, oh, well, actually, I'm totally doing that right now. But I would venture to say you're probably not doing that in the most efficient way possible because you had no plan. So that's why we're going to talk a lot about the foundations of planning, because it really does set the stage as to how to think about it. The plan itself solves this problem, right? This idea of no clear roadmap. That's the whole point of this, the fact that there is no clear roadmap. So when you're going through, marketers really have 3 core problems. It's either the no clear roadmap, there's chaotic reports, or there's just sort of random acts of marketing that they're doing. This one, when it comes to the plan, it really is designed to solve this issue. So if you've ever thought to yourself, like, we're not even sure what to measure, or we're not even sure what actions we're supposed to be taking. We see all these reports, but we have no idea what to do with it. That's in the planning process. That's when it actually gets solved. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in this lesson. There are typically 3 big frustrations that happen. First, you're either unsure of the questions you're supposed to ask. Second, you have no idea what information you are supposed to collect. Third, you are unprepared to take actions even if you have answers, which again, don't feel bad if that's you, because that was me years ago. That's everybody. We all start in that process. And that's just because, generally speaking, the tools themselves, and by the tools in this case, let's say something like Google Analytics, they don't tell you, like, the first thing you need to do is to do a plan before you start using our tool. Nope. They say, install this plugin, turn on this integration, pop the code on the page, and then start using the tool. Yay, it's going to be awesome. And it's not. It ends up being really, really frustrating. So what we're going to do in this particular call, this particular lesson, is we're going to move this from being unsure of the questions to ask, so actually you have a plan. You actually know what sort of questions you're supposed to be asking. You're going to be very aware of the information you should be collecting in order to get those answers answered, or the questions answered, I should say. And then finally, we're going to be prepared to take the actions. So you're sure of the questions, you're aware of the information you need to collect to get the answers, and you are prepared to take actions. And think about that. That's before you even go into Google Analytics. Now, how much more useful will your analytics be? Actually, it's quite a bit more useful. And when I say Google Analytics, it doesn't mean you have to go to Google Analytics. It could be a Data Studio report or a spreadsheet. It doesn't matter. This planning you can use for anything when it comes to any sort of measurement at all. Now, as you saw in the framework itself, the planning step has 3 core keys: questions, information, and action, right? Pretty simple. You can start to see a little pattern here. So that's exactly what we are going to cover in this lesson. We're going to have 3 different topics, each topic focused on its specific sections. We're going to have one topic focused around the questions and how to come up with those. Second, around the information you should be able to collect. And then third, around the actions that you will take once you get those answers. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump right in. And we will start, of course, with our first topic, questions. We'll see you there. When Your Measurement Plan continues, Lesson 1, with our first topic, questions. All right. This is it. There's only ever 2 types of questions. The biggest mistake I see in measurement as a field is that it is dramatically overcomplicated. Now, that's because it's really easy to overcomplicate it. There's like a million dials and buttons and switches and everything moving around in this machinery that is the world of measurement. But when it comes to questions, what most people do, I know I did for a fact, I'm like, I don't know what questions to ask. So what am I going to do? I'm going to Google it. So I Google, what are the 11 questions, or what questions should e-commerce owner know, or what questions should a direct response marketer know, or what questions should I be asking as a marketer, right? What questions should I be asking in Google Analytics? And you get millions of blog posts and thousands of videos and everything else that's coming through, each of them telling you slightly different things, some of them contradicting each other. And in reality, they're not all that helpful. There are only 2 types of questions, and you're looking at both of them right now. There are results questions, and there are how questions. That's the only 2 that you can do: results questions and how questions. The only skill you need to build is asking results questions and then making sure you ask how questions. And if you keep doing that over and over again, and believe me, I've done this thousands, probably tens of thousands of times at this point, becomes an innate skill. Your ability to ask better questions gets substantially better. So what are we talking about when we say results questions and how questions? So the results, these are result-oriented questions. Now I've got here a picture of Data Studio, and part of the reason I'm using Data Studio, and we'll take a look at analytics a little bit later in this lesson, but part of the reason we're doing this is to show you that it doesn't really matter what tools you use. This is the planning concept is a strategy, right? The plan itself is a strategy. So when you're asking questions, the results questions are sort of the end of the customer journey, the end of the user journey, the end of whatever journey that person's on that you're trying to get. So in this case, the particular journey for whatever the thing is generating revenue. So the end result is ask questions around like, what's my revenue? How many did I sell? What's my overall conversion rate? These are all sort of the results questions. Now, my guess is you've probably already asked those because those are the simple ones to ask. Right? And again, I don't mean simple in a derogatory way. You need to ask those. Everybody sort of naturally starts with results questions. The challenge is they just stay with results questions. So in the beginning, you might say things like, well, I need to know how much revenue I'm making. And then somebody says, well, yeah, but how many transactions? And you're like, oh, I never thought about that. But that's still just a result question. It's the end of the process. And they say, oh, you got into your average ticket or your average cart. Okay, well, that's still just revenue divided by transactions. It's still just the result of things. It's a different way of looking at results. Oh, what's your conversion rate? Oh, I didn't know I was supposed to measure for that. So I'm going to measure for my core conversion rate. Cool. But that's still just a result of the process, right? They're all the end of the process. The more important questions, the harder questions, are these how questions. And the how questions, and we're going to start very simple because we're talking about foundations here in this lesson. The how questions are all about how you got that result, and you have to have both. How questions are not optional. They're not nice to have. They are required. You must ask these questions so that you can get these answers. So in particular, is the landing page working? Well, how would I know that? I would know that because I can measure from the landing page to the cart to see if the landing page is setting up the expectations properly, delivering the user to the next step, in this case, the cart page, so that the cart can then do its job. And then, of course, I can ask that question. Is the cart working the way it's supposed to? Well, how would I know that? Because I can measure the cart to the thank you page or to the whatever that next step is that I'm going through. You can ask questions like, you may haven't given enough traffic in the first place. Maybe this particular process works incredibly well, and your user journey is converting the way that it needs to at every step of the way, but you don't have enough going in. Well, that's an important thing to know, right? So now you can ask all of these how questions to get your results. And this is a really important point here because a lot of students come to us at the time with what I call the curse of a good offer. The curse of a good offer is where somebody is, they've got this little funnel set up, let's say, and they're running traffic on Facebook as an example, because Facebook's kind of famous for it. And they come in and they say, well, we're going to give Facebook $100. And then Facebook spits out $200. And they go, wow, everyone said this return on investment thing. That's what I need. I need my ROAS, right? My return on ad spend. So I'm going to give Facebook $200. And then Facebook gives them $500 back. And they go, wow, okay, I insert $200, I get $500. Now keep in mind, most of those businesses, they're not measuring the how steps. They're just measuring dollars in, dollars out, which is okay. You got to start somewhere. But then they ramp it up. They give Facebook $1,000. Facebook gives them $2,000. They're like, holy cow, Facebook is amazing. It's just what everybody said. Let's give Facebook $10,000. And then Facebook keeps it. And then they go, okay. At this point, they've added headcount. They've got a big company. They've got a big giant warehouse. They've just thought Facebook was going to work that way forever. And so when Facebook keeps all the money and doesn't spit out $20,000 or $30,000 like it was doing before, they start going, well, what broke? And everybody around them goes, I don't know. They all shrug shoulders. And they're like, I don't know. Why? Because they didn't know the how. They didn't know their machinery. And that is why you have to know results and how, right? Results and how. All right, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to take a look at sort of how we're doing this, because I think it's important to kind of show how we do it for our own measurement in our own process and funnel, so you can kind of see that. So let's take a look at results and how when it comes to the Academy. So, of course, this is the Measurement Marketing Academy, at least the current iteration of this. This will rapidly change for reasons that all of you will actually find out as we go through this lesson. But the Academy page itself, if I need to see the results and how, we have created Data Studio reports for that. So I can see a particular report set out. And of course, again, this is not a course on Data Studio, but this is an example. All we did was we went through, created our plan, we did our builds, we added Data Studio into it. And that's because even though I am definitely numbers tolerant, right? I like numbers, but I don't want to stay all day in spreadsheets and Google Analytics. I need to be able to get in and get back out. I have work to do. So I don't want to get trapped in a bunch of data tables. So we have Data Studio reports. Now in this one report, I've actually already set this up so that it's looking at just Infusionsoft. It's just looking at our emails from Infusionsoft. So in this case, this is the autoresponder campaigns and this sort of stuff. So I can measure a very specific traffic source and how it's moving through the journey of the Academy. And we have something called the Eyes on the Journey reports. If you're an Academy member, you've been around for a little while, you might already be familiar with that. Also, a Get It Done guide that's in the Academy for those of you who haven't taken a look at that yet. The Eyes on the Journey report, I'm going to come back to in a future topic. So we're going to actually do that in the next topic. So let's stick around with this one. So when I want to know my results and I want to know how I'm getting my results, in one report, I've got my revenue amount. I've got the number of transactions. I don't measure it in this particular way. I measure it in a slightly different way, which I'm going to show you in a second, as far as the average ticket, because some of you are thinking, well, what's the average cart value? I have that in a different spot. I'm going to show you a different way to measure it than how this is truly what we do as a company. So I'm not holding anything back. I'm not doing anything hypothetical. This is exactly how we do this. So I can see my overall conversion rate, and I can start to see, okay, here's my offer page, how much traffic I got, how many of those actually went to the cart, and is it working the way it's supposed to, right? Because we talk about in the measurement framework how important it is to forecast. In other words, you have to have a number that you're trying to hit. So in this case, I can see our forecast is 8 to 12, looks like 8%. It's okay. It's within range. Again, tiny bits of traffic, of course, but within range so far. Well, then I see something like this, and you see that it's 100%. So both people that went to the cart purchased, which is, of course, great, but also really high. Now, when you have tiny numbers like this, it's going to do that, right? You're just going to have that problem with wild swings. But if this stayed really high, I'd want to focus on this, because I think that the offer page could be tweaked a little bit to send more people through the cart, so I can bring this back into reason. But let's say I keep this for now. And you can see that overall my conversion rate is 8% versus what we were expecting, which is 1 to 3. Now, part of the reason that happens is because this particular chart is really forecasting where we primarily use it for cold traffic, not so much to measure warm traffic. Warm traffic does have a higher conversion rate. I would expect 5 to 10%. So actually, this is perfectly in line for what that number is. But the beauty of this system is, as I take this stuff out, and I'm going to show you all the different traffic sources we have now. So we're just going to do that. Actually, let me do this. Take all my mediums. I'm going to give this a second to recalculate the beauty of Data Studio and real-time reports. So I'm just going to stay quiet for just a moment as this recalculates itself, and then our editor can go back here, and he's going to take this out in the edited student editions that all of you will be able to see. I'm going to go ahead and bring up all our mediums. Okay, so I've just reset this. So it's all the different traffic sources. And you can see during this particular date range, just the last couple of weeks for us. So now you can see traffic up quite a bit. Now the numbers, of course, have changed, right? They've changed in a big way. So it went from, I'm 8 to 12% is what we expect to go to the cart. That's not working that way. So we have 3% going here. We got roughly 3 to 4% going here, but it's roughly about the same, right? As time works on, those patterns work out. So we need help by getting from offer to cart, right? Because the how step is off. We know the question I'm trying to answer around the cart. Is the cart working the way it's supposed to? Remember, it was one of those how questions. Well, I know the answers here because it's not. It's supposed to be doing 30 to 40%. It's substantially less. Now, we're going to talk about why that is in this lesson, because the part of the reason we're recording this lesson now is because we are in the process of changing things. We want to show you exactly why we are changing things, right? This is actually not unexpected. But then you can see the overall conversion rate, right? We have this less than 1%. That's not great. It's not supposed to do in that, at least on the monthly option, and definitely less than 1% when it comes to the annual options. So we've got to make sure that, we know our results aren't where they need to be, and we know why. It's because the whole thing's broken, right? In reality, the offers, they're not going to the cart in the right way. The cart's not going to the thank you page in the right way. And the reason that this is happening, just to kind of give you the reason as to why this is happening right now, is because this is the same page we have used for years. Same page we have used for a long, long, long time. There was one important change recently, and that is when we raised the price of the Academy. So this particular page was built to sell a monthly membership, and we recently changed that to the annual access for Academy members because it really is just a better service for everybody. It takes a while to learn measurement. We didn't want to make anybody have to make a decision that they have to get as much as they possibly can done in 30 days because people were making silly decisions because they were rushing too fast with it. And we wanted people to have time. This takes a while to learn. So we're focusing on those individuals who are serious about measurement. And of course, an annual program is just better suited for that. It's a higher chance of success. But this offer, this part down here changed. None of this other stuff did. This is all the exact same stuff. So the value that this particular page was there to generate wasn't to sell a $2,000 program. It wasn't designed to do that. So there's going to be a new page that is. But we knew as soon as we were going to change the offer, we knew the numbers were going to tank. It used to work really, really well, but we know they're not now because we obviously changed the offer without changing the value of how we sold that offer, right? The actual messaging. So that's what we're in the process of doing as we're actually recording this particular WIN course at the moment. But that explains, right? This is not unexpected. Like I said, this explains why things have dropped down the way that they did. So the important part of this particular lesson, though, is around the questions that I'm asking is I know exactly how we're getting the results, I know what results we are getting, and I know how we're getting the results. Now I'm going to show you one other place or another way that we do that. And that is with, and again, this is the stuff that this is what I use to guide the company, right? To guide measurementmarketing.io. You do not have to do this. I'm just showing you how I do it. This is something that we talk about in WIN forecasting revenue and results. So if you've been through that particular WIN, you are probably familiar with this format. But we have this concept of how many people are we asking to purchase a particular product. In this case, the Measurement Marketing Academy. And we ask, and then we measure how many people consider that, which we are measuring through the cart view. And then of course, how many people complete the transaction in that particular journey, in this case, a purchase. So this is quite literally what we actually do. So we have the forecast for each week, and then we have the actual for that week that goes in. So we're only a couple of weeks into January of 2022. This is the forecast for that week. This is the actual for week 1. So we actually get a little more traffic than we were initially expecting. Now, this is not page views. This is what we call an investigate signal. So for us, it's when they are looking at the offer for at least 4 seconds, right? Again, you don't have to do this. I'm just saying, just to kind of give a demonstration of how we do it. You could totally use a page view, would be fine. But we can see here we've got more people investigating the offer than initially we thought were going to be there during the holiday week, which is fine, right? Technically week after the holiday. But we thought 30%, that's what we were projecting. 30% should have gone to the cart. In this case, 18% did. Now we netted about the same number of cart views. This actually just is a page view that we're measuring. So we can see, okay, fine, we got enough people to go to the cart roughly that we wanted. But we figured 15% of those were going to purchase. Why? Because we jacked up the price without instilling the value. The cart has a much harder job now, and it's not designed to build value, right? The offer page really is what needs the help. And remember, we knew this. We knew doing this is going to cause the results we were looking for, which is why these percentages drop down. But I digress. We were going through the cart, and here we can see 18% actually purchased. So we netted out about what we wanted to do, with the exception of this little average cart. And so if you're thinking like, oh, where does he get average cart? Well, all I do is I pull the Infusionsoft reports or the authorized.net payment processing reports or your bank account or whatever the thing is, WooCommerce, if that's what you're using. You pull the number of transactions that you did for that particular product, divide the number of transactions by the revenue, that gives you your average cart. But I have an expectation of what that's supposed to be, because this is the results are my transactions and my sales. How I get those transactions and sales is equally as important, actually more important, because this tells me my machinery. And then each week we do the actuals and we'll adjust forecast out based upon the actuals coming through. So you can see week 2, the most recent week that we have closed out here. So because we're recording this actual win in week 3, so it's obviously hasn't happened yet, but we had 45, we got 61. But again, look at that, 18% is what went to cart. Eerie, right? It's kind of trends and patterns. You start to see this. So I might start thinking to myself, wow, for the next couple of weeks until we get this page built, I might have to drop this down because it's just a little bit too high, right? 30% is probably too high. But I'm starting to really understand how I'm getting my results, right? I wanted 35 sales total. We got 25. I wanted an average ticket of 155. We only got 91 for that particular average ticket. And the big reason for us is because there was no annual sale that week. The annuals are such a big amount that they dramatically improve the numbers or hurt the numbers, right? So, but again, this is okay. It's expected. We knew for a few weeks we were going to be running through this process. But the important thing is not what the numbers are, what actions we're taking to improve them. The important thing is we know where we stand. We know what we're trying to get. And that is because we know our results and how, because we ask questions around both. So what the results are, which is this bottom stuff here, and then how are we getting those results? I'm just showing you multiple ways that we actually measure for those. Now I'm going to give you one other one, and that is in analytics, actually a couple other ones. So we'll go to analytics, and I wanted to show you just in Google Analytics how you can get this, because you can do this multiple ways. We can go to all traffic. I'm going to go to source medium. The source medium report, really the best report. I think it's the super report when it comes to universal analytics because it answers so many questions in one section, right? So what I can do here is we have ACE goals set up. For those of you who have been through WIN Google Analytics basics, you know about ACE goals. So we have the ACE goals of how many people actually saw the Academy page. Now this is measured as a page view. So not how many people saw the offer, but how many people actually just loaded the page. So I can see which traffic sources are loading the page. I can then see which traffic sources are actually helping to move them through the cart to engage them in the ACE model, be called engagement. And I can, of course, see which ones are actually closing the deal, which traffic sources are better at actually creating purchases in this case, right? The completion of that user journey. So aware, complete, and engage. We can ask questions around that. And you'll notice that as we teach at measurement-marketing.io, in multiple ways, we're essentially teaching overlapping lessons. ACE is all about results and how. You have to know your machinery, because that's what the biggest mistake is that marketers make. So when it comes to measurement, I think it's having no plan. It's the biggest mistake. When it comes to marketing, it's not understanding your machinery. And the worst, as an entrepreneur, the worst thing you can ever hear, or as a business owner, or as a boss, or anything, the worst thing you could ever say is, I don't care as long as I'm making money. Because the second that happens, I guarantee you're going to care a lot when you aren't. And at that point, it's too late because you never measured it. So you don't know your results and how. So that's with just a few different ways that you can take a look at results and how questions. So with that, we will go ahead and wrap up. Oop, filled my slide too fast. I'm going to have to recut. Sorry, Vince. Vince is our editor, by the way. So whenever you hear me mention Vince, it's so that he can edit this. With that, we'll go ahead and wrap up our first topic of lesson number 1, questions. Coming up next, we're going to dive into the second part of what we call our q.i.a process when it comes to planning. So first we talk about questions. The I is, of course, information. We'll see you there. When your measurement plan continues, lesson number 1 with our second topic, information. Information. This is the secret to information. It's not about the numbers. As much as you've been seeing numbers here, I get that. You've been seeing numbers, but behaviors is really what matters. And that's the mental shift that you make. So when it comes to measurement, when it comes to Googling things on the internet, we talked about that before around questions. People will Google what metrics are important to measure. That's what they think it's all about, the numbers. Oh, you got to know your lifetime value. Oh, you got to know your average cart value. Oh, you got to know your revenue. Oh, you got to know number of transactions. Okay, yes, do. However, that's not really that important stuff. Not really. There's a million ways you can get those numbers, by cart views, by your cart systems, I should say. Analytics, of course, can help you with things like that. But if you don't understand the behaviors, you're not going to be able to impact behaviors, because behaviors are what's causing the numbers to show up. So it's all about behaviors when you think about information. Now, does that mean no numbers? Of course not. All you saw was numbers in the first topic. But the reason that those numbers were there is because we were measuring for the behaviors to give us the answers. So when we thought about cart to purchase, for example, or moving through the cart, it's the behaviors of how many people load the cart page measured against the behaviors of people who make it to the thank you page, right? So we're measuring for certain behaviors. That's what makes those numbers show up. But it's behaviors first. It's not about the numbers. So when it comes to behaviors, this is an Eyes on the Journey report. So again, some of you might be familiar with this one already, something that the Academy is kind of famous for teaching. The Eyes on the Journey report is a report that we created because we were asking our results and how questions. We wanted to see, and you saw earlier in topic 1, how we had that sort of funnel flowchart looking thing that said, well, here's how many people saw the offer. Here's how many people went to the cart. Here's how many of those purchased for the average ticket of to create the revenue of, blah, blah, blah. You saw that sort of process. But at a certain point, we know that there's going to be a certain step that's not working properly. So we started asking deeper questions around a certain step. It wasn't just, well, how many people move from the offer to the cart? But okay, they're not moving from the offer to the cart. It's not working the way it's supposed to. Why not? Well, we have to start looking at the results and how for just one step. In this case, this is literally an example of the cart page, of the Academy page, the actual offer page itself. So that is this page. I'm just going to bring it up so we can kind of compare apples to apples. So it's measuring this page. This exact design actually is what this one particularly measures. So when we come back into this particular report, the Eyes on the Journey, the reason we call it the Eyes is because we're measuring for different stages. Remember, it's on one page. So we're asking the question, right? The results question is how many people went to the cart, because that's the result of that page. It's supposed to get them to click to go to the cart. That's our initiated step right down here. But we start with impression. Then we move to introduced. How many of those were actually introduced? How many of those were interested in the copy that was there, the messaging, the sales orientation, the information, whatever it was? How many of those investigated the actual offer, meaning they actually looked at the offer, took time, and were giving us some sort of behavior? And then, of course, how many of those actually initiated, right? That's the final result. These other steps are the how steps, right? All this other stuff here, this is the how we achieve that initiate. So again, still results in how, but now it's focused on a particular page, and we needed to measure for behavior. So we didn't just think, well, how many people were introduced? It's like, what does that mean? What is introduced? Introduced is a behavior. Stayed on page for at least 10 seconds. Because and you probably have done this where you're maybe playing a game on your phone and all of a sudden you're trying to power up in between levels or whatever it is, and they throw one of those ads on you, and you accidentally click the ad, and you're like, get me out of this ad. You have no concept what you clicked on. You're just trying to get back to playing your game. But meanwhile, what's mostly happening, not everywhere, hopefully, but most of the time what's happening is you're being thrown into retargeting audience now because clearly you're interested in tires or whatever that thing was clicking to get you to go to. And then you're being remarketed over something you have no idea that's not relevant at all. And that's because they measured that behavior thinking, oh, well, you were totally into us because you clicked on the link, but you're not. We know you're not. They know, come on. But the behavior, when you measure for the behavior, you say, well, listen, I'm going to make sure they're being here at least 10 seconds. At that point, there is some sort of basic awareness of where you are. And therefore, at that point, we tell Facebook, okay, they're interested, they're introduced to the page. It's a better quality retargeting audience, right? So little things like that you can do. We talk a lot about that, by the way, in W.I.N Google Tag Manager retargeting basics. So you'll see all of that under W.I.N Google Tag Manager retargeting. But the idea of behaviors here, when you're thinking about planning out the behaviors, and you think about, okay, what information am I going to need to be able to collect? In this case, it's how many people stay on the page for 10 seconds. In this page, it's we need to know how many people are scrolling down halfway. And in our case, we added another step to it, which is you have to be there at least, scroll at least halfway and be there for a total of 45 seconds. When those two things are true, then we suggest you're interested. So to give you an example, when I load up this page, the immediate time I load it up, it's an impression. The second I'm on here, 10 seconds, it becomes introduced. As I scroll down to about the halfway point currently, right about here, I say interested. Now, if I just scroll down, like, I guess that's okay, but I could, you know what it's like when you read an offer page. You come in, you kind of go like, okay, what is all this stuff about? How much is it? Okay, let me go see if it's worth it. Well, when I'm doing that, I'm scrolling. So I can't just say scroll halfway. We wanted the specific behavior to demonstrate interest. What behavior would sort of be an indication, better than average chance, that that person is truly interested in the thing. And that is, well, if you scrolled halfway and you're still there for 45 seconds, like there's some sort of interest, clearly, because you didn't just load the page and go to lunch. That's why I can't use just 45 seconds, because this could be that. And that doesn't merely show that you're interested. But if you scrolled halfway and you're still there, there's something going on. That's some sort of interest. And that's what we think about. We think about these behaviors, right? What's the behavior that's going to generate the number that we're going to need? We're going to need to collect these behaviors. That's how we measure this stuff. So that in this particular case is that interest signal. And then finally, we have that the big one is the investigate. Like what's the behavior that shows that they are better than average chance investigating, truly thinking about purchasing this particular product or service that that's on this particular page, right? Or taking the next action, whatever the next action happens to be. So in this case, it's looking at the pricing table. So when you come down here, and you're already past the interested section, when you come down here and you investigate. So if somebody's coming down here and they're staring at this, in this case, I think we timed ours for 4 seconds, and I think it's still like that. So when we see 4 seconds, somebody's looking at this particular part of the page, we can make an assumption. Again, it doesn't mean we're right 100% of the time, but we don't care about being right 100% of the time. We just need trends and patterns. That's all we need. So here I can see if somebody's looking at this for at least 4 seconds, there's probably some sort of thinking process where they are some sort of consideration going on saying, maybe, right? Maybe. Doesn't mean they're going to click the button to go to the cart. That would be the initiate, but at least we know they investigated, right? So when I go back to this Eyes on the Journey report, think about what I can do versus what maybe somebody else can do. I know how many people loaded up the page. I know how they interacted with the page. I know the result that particular step got. Remember, results and how. So, and that's the only reason I'm doing that is because I think in terms of behaviors when it comes to information. That's what unlocked the ability for us to come up with this idea in the first place, is because we weren't tied up in the numbers. We were trying to measure behaviors, and we're always thinking about what behaviors. And then, of course, the behaviors, the way to measure them creates numbers, because it'll be the number of people who stayed on the page for at least 10 seconds, the number of people who scrolled halfway, the number of people who at least looked for 4 seconds, the number of people who clicked on the button. That's where the numbers come from. So, of course, there's numbers. It's not that there's no numbers. It's just that it's behaviors first mentality. So that's the trick when it comes to information. Now, basic versus intention behaviors is an important standpoint here. Now, you've heard me mention both, a basic behavior versus an intention-based behavior. Let's go take a look, and I want to sort of separate out what those are in the system. So if I come to loading in this page, I just click on a link, the URL loads. That is what we call a basic behavior. here at the Measurement Marketing Academy. The reason that we call it that is because platforms like Google Analytics just easily capture that. By default, if I come into the behavior reports of Universal Analytics, I go to site content, I can go to all pages, and I can see all the different pages that loaded. In other words, all the pages that had either analytics code, if that's what you're putting on your pages, or tag manager code, which is what we use for tag manager. We can see all the pages that lit up. Instant. It's basic. It's a built-in behavior when it comes to Universal Analytics. It's very, very easy. Now, the other behaviors, intention-based behaviors, are all the other stuff. So we have used Tag Manager for that. So we have Tag Manager say, hey, it's been 1001, 1002, all the way up to 1010, and it's doing this counting system. It goes, oh, they've been there 10 seconds. Let's send that event to Google Analytics. And then the event shows up here. So you'll see all of these different pages. In fact, let me just do this. I'm going to go to pages, and then we're going to go into a particular page. Let's use the Academy page right here. So now I'm in my events report under behavior. So under events, I go to pages. These are the events that are happening on the pages. These are these things that we've customized. Now, I'm going to just emphasize this here. You do not have to do this to start, right? We are a Summit style measurement system. We have been doing this for years longer than you have. So it makes sense that we're further down the path because we've gone through the framework hundreds and hundreds of times. Our measurement muscle is a bit bigger probably than where yours is right now. But ours was where you are now. So just keep that in mind. You don't have to do everything we're doing right now. Just know that eventually you could. And, you know, that's the whole point of showing you some of this stuff. So if we go through here, we can go into the journey, I believe is where the event is, the category of the events. And there's our eyes. Here's how many impressions, how many were introduced, how many were interested, how many investigated, how many initiated. So Tag Manager is sort of listening in the background, and then it sends the details when it sees a certain behavior that it's being told to watch out for. It then is triggers, right? The trigger fires, and then it sends the event into Google Analytics, and it tells Facebook to give up information to Facebook so they can build an audience or whatever the other things are that it needs to do. And it's all based on behaviors. But these behaviors are more intention-based behaviors. A basic behavior is something the platform really just sort of does on its own. You sort of turn it on and it works. And that's great, and you start with the basics. But eventually, as you, especially maybe the second or third time you're going through the framework, you will want to start doing intention-based behaviors so that you can see once the page loads, right? Think about this. Most people, most businesses, they have their offer page load and they know how many people saw the offer page, but they have no clue what happened on the offer page. They don't have any behaviors about what's happening on the offer page. Just do they make it to the cart page? And that's it. And so there's this big sort of black box that they don't see because they don't know, like you do now, they don't know to think about behaviors. They don't know to think about the basic behavior is the page load, but the intention-based behavior, like what intention? Are they actually intending to be interested? Was this something they were just clicking on and then left immediately? Because that's one audience, a page that comes in here, they're here less than 10 seconds. It's a different audience for somebody that's here 10 seconds but did not get interested. It's a different audience of people who got interested but did not investigate the offer. And it's still a different audience of people who investigated but didn't click. And of course, there's the clicked but didn't purchase. So all of those are different audiences that we can measure for because we really understand our results and how when it comes to the questions we're asking, which is where it started. It wasn't like we set the stuff up and then thought, what can we answer now? We came up with the questions first, and then we decided, okay, we are now going to collect this information, in other words, these behaviors. And now that we know results in how behaviors, basic and intention-based behaviors, we can answer all sorts of stuff because we have a better than average understanding of how users are interacting with the page itself at various stages. If you think about it like an online store, an offline store, it's that concept of if somebody walked into your shoe store, like if you just ignored them and they walked out, like that's not great. If you saw a salesperson doing that, if you were the manager, you wouldn't be happy. But if somebody comes in, they pick up shoes, they look around, they try them on, and then they decide not to buy, like you might want to go back to the salesperson and say, like, what did you say to them? Like, maybe we can work on the pitch or the close. Did you tell them about the buy one, get one free offer, all that sort of stuff? And you can help improve your sales process if you can see what's happening. That's what this information stage actually helps you to do because now you know to think in terms of the behaviors that are happening on the page or through the customer journey that you start to measure. Remember, basic and intention, you have access to both. It's okay to start with basic. And with that, we will wrap up our second topic of lesson number 1, information. Coming up next, our third topic for lesson number 1, it's all about the actions. We'll see you there. When your measurement plan wraps up with our final topic of lesson number 1, actions. This is the secret sauce when it comes to actions. This is the secret sauce when it comes to actions. If this, then that. So how this works is, again, going back to just a regular Data Studio report here. You sort of have this little flow chart. You understand your journey. You got your results and how questions. But you have to think about, and this is important, so important, before you look at these numbers, you're thinking about what's going to happen when you see the numbers. So if the overall conversion rate is higher than 3%, I'm going to expand my targeting. Let's pretend I'm going for a cold traffic offer. If my conversion rate is substantially higher than 5%, like if it's 8 to 12%, something like that, like that's crazy high. A conversion rate can be too high. And if it's really, really high, it probably means I'm not effectively expanding my targeted audience. I'm just talking to hot buyers or warm buyers, which means I'm not scaling my traffic. So probably. So I would look to do that. If it's really, really low, then I might have a problem with maybe having to rework the message on the page itself, or potentially have to rework the target audience. Maybe just a really bad targeted audience for whatever reason. But I would investigate those actions. Then remember, this is what I'm thinking. And of course, if it's right, if it just is right in the middle into the Goldilocks zone, it works perfectly well, then it's okay, I'm gonna go get more traffic because the thing's working. Like, let's go get more, right? Maybe investigate another traffic source or something like that. So I think about all those actions ahead of time. Then I come in, I look at the report, I go to the number that I care about, which in this case is the conversion rate, and now I know what to do. So very quickly, I see the number, I know the action instantly, practically instantly. Why? Because I've already thought about it. Just like when you're driving in your car, and we talk about this a lot in W.I.N Google Data Studio Dashboard Basics, we talk about the reporting and everything, and this concept of the car dashboard. When you look at your car and you see your speedometer, you instantly know, do I hit the gas or hit the brake? You instantly know that. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to analyze it. We get asked all the time, oh, I want to have a class. Can you help our team analyze our reports? I'm like, you shouldn't have to analyze your reports. Your reports should be simpler. Why are you making your reports that they have to be analyzed? They should naturally tell a story that leads to an action so quickly that just the fact that you were exposed to the information, you already know what to do. And now you go back to work. Now you can go back to focusing on activities that are actually going to improve the results or have a better than average chance of doing so. So this step, this action step out of the entire planning process, this is the thing that people mess up the most because they don't even think to role play it. And that's all it is. You're just role playing. You're just saying, okay, well, if the number is this, it's going to be this. So I would do the same thing here. If I come up here, we go, okay, well, if it's higher than 15 or 20%, what are we going to do? Right? If it's, or in this case, 8 to 12% is the sweet spot. So if it's higher than that, what are we going to look for? If it's lower than that, what are we going to do? If it's in the middle, what are we going to do? So if it's lower, let's just start with this particular offer to cart. If this number was substantially lower than 8%, I am absolutely going to rework the messaging on the cart. First thing I'm going to do is look at the eyes in the journey because that gives me kind of a deep dive. And the eyes in the journey is going to give me two things. It's going to say either the copy was too complicated and people are confused and you need to simple it up, or it's going to say, nope, they get it. They just don't think the value is there. So you need to do a better job of explaining the value. It's one of those two options, sometimes both. And so that's what I would do if it was substantially low, if the eyes in the journey told me to do one of those two options. If it's much higher, I'm going to look at that and say, well, if it's really high, I need to make sure the first thing I need to check is the cart in range. Because typically what will happen is if this goes really high, this actually happened to us a few years ago. We had this massively high offer to cart. It was like 40% of the people were going to the cart page. And again, conversion rates can be too high. That's a bad thing sometimes, actually most of the time. It's an indicative of that, or it's an indication that there is a problem in the machinery. So I went and said, okay, there's 40% going to the cart. That's crazy high. That's not right. And sure enough, the first thing I did, I knew I would look for the cart to see, is the cart performing properly? My guess is no. And it wasn't, and it typically doesn't. So we get 40% going to the cart massively high, what they call cart abandonment rate. Well, we always measure cart click-through rates instead, but it was like a 5% click-through rate, which means like 95% of the people were leaving the cart. Why was this happening? Why are these behaviors happening? Remember, I don't care about the numbers. I truly, truly don't. The numbers just represent the behaviors. So in my head, I am visualizing a ton of people that are more people than they should going to the cart. And I know now they are not going to the cart with the intention of purchasing because those numbers are so high. They're crazy high conversion rates. And what would cause that? You just think about it. Well, they're going to the cart because they have a question, because something's coming up that they think the cart's going to answer. And that's why. And the page isn't there. The page is getting them interested enough, but it doesn't do the job because they're going to the cart, but they're clearly not buying because they weren't going to the cart to buy. They were going to the cart to answer questions, and the cart's not designed to answer questions. The sales page is. So maybe they're looping back. And that's exactly what we ended up seeing. In fact, I will show you how we did this in Google Analytics. We actually went back. There's a report you can use. And you can go into your conversions report. This is assuming you have it set up properly, which remember, you don't have to do all of this to get started. I'm just showing you what's possible. There's a report called a goal flow report. And we went in here and we have our little funnel that's already set up in Google Analytics. This is all the stuff we teach in Win Google Analytics Basics. So, and we can see a sales page, cart page, etc. But what we did is we said, okay, well, let's go highlight the traffic. And when you do that, you see these little loopbacks. This is normal because you do this, I do this, right? You go to the cart, you want to check the shipping or something like that, and then you go back to the page to see if it's really worth it. Like that sort of stuff happens. So we see this little loopback. Well, we saw when those numbers were really high, we said, you know what I bet's happening? They probably have a question. The sales page is creating a question instead of answering them. It's creating a question. They think the cart page will have the answer. And then they're probably going back to the sales page, maybe to investigate. Let's find out. The goal flow, this particular line says being a nice little skinny line, which is normal. It was a big, giant, fat gray line. And we went, okay, that is definitely what's going on. Now that we know the behaviors, now that we know how the machinery is working, we went back to the page. And we simply asked we kind of looked at the page differently, which is what is useful because you see the answers easier when you have an intention in mind of what to look for. So we came to the page and we knew that this page was creating a question that it wasn't supposed to create. And it was telling them to go to the cart to figure it out. What was it? It was really simple. Back in the day, this is years ago, this section had been adjusted. I don't think it was even a pricing table back then, probably just a button. Forgot to put the price. They were making a bunch of copy changes. They were going too fast. And it was like, join the academy today or get started today. And people were like, okay, let's get started. But I have no idea how much it is. So I have to click on the get started, I guess, to find out. So they were going to find out how much it was, would go to the cart. And of course, what's the first thing you do then? Well, now that I know how much it is it worth it? Let's go back to the sales page to see if it's worth it. And we exactly saw that behavior because we practically begged for it. Because of the design of the page. So all we did is, and it wasn't purposeful, it wasn't some weird marketing trick, it wasn't something we heard about in Lay's Mastermind, just a mistake, but we saw it within like a day of this page going live. It was so cool to be able to see that. Excuse me, I'm gonna have to edit out that cough too. But we were going through and we saw that happening and then instantly changed it back, added the price back in, all the numbers fell back in line. And then okay, perfect. Now it's just the traffic issue, right? Everything was working the way it needed to, we just need to get more traffic. But this concept of actions was really important because we role played all that stuff ahead of time. So we don't have to think about what's going on. And when people say, well, I'm trying to analyze stuff, that's really what they're asking is we're trying to figure out what actions we should be taking based upon the answers that we're getting. That's what analysis is really all about, trying to get you to actions. And in reality, you should have already thought about the actions. Another popular question we get, just to sort of put a cap on this actions thing, is whether it's, in the academy itself as an instructor or just live trainings or anything that we're doing, people say, well, we're just trying to figure out how people are using the blog. First thing I ask, how are people supposed to use your blog? And it's a lot of blank faces. How people maybe move through our e-commerce store. How are people supposed to move through your e-commerce store? It's a lot of blank faces. They haven't thought about those actions. They haven't thought about how things are supposed to work. So they can't answer if things are working or not. That's what this action step helps you to do. All right. Finally, when it comes to actions, and I know some of you might be thinking, okay, this is a measurement plan. We're supposed to be talking about KPIs and metrics and everything else. In reality, I don't think you should. The KPI is actually really, really easy. KPI, by the way, standing for Key Performance Indicator, for those that have always wondered but never do. So when it comes to KPIs, every number is a PI. There's a performance indicator, right? Indicator of some sort of performance. Every single number. Revenue, metrics, conversion numbers, units sold, page views, investigate signals, whatever the thing is, any sort of behavior that you're measuring will produce a number because you've measured it. That number is a performance indicator of some way, shape, or form. Your KPI is the thing that you need to focus your actions on. And that KPI moves around. So if my conversion rate was off and it wasn't where it needed to be, that's the number I'm focused on. That becomes my key performance indicator that I'm putting all the resources into to make it move. That's going to move the needle because that's the thing that's off. But if my revenue was off, I might start looking, and the funnel worked perfectly. I might say, for example, the conversion rate was all fine, but my revenue just wasn't where I wanted it. What's the other thing I can move? Average ticket. I might charge more. I might in upsells, do something like that in this particular journey to improve that. If it was here, the cart page to the thank you page, when my cart abandonment rate maybe was much higher than I wanted it to be, or the other opposite way of saying that is the cart through rate was much lower than where I wanted it to be, what would I do? Well, maybe I need to add testimonials to the cart or, put on there a little reference to the product or a product image to sort of show like, yes, they're on the right cart and here's how it works, and restate the offer a little better, right? Something like that maybe it's just traffic isn't enough. So everything works just fine. I just don't have enough people coming into the top. I always think about this like shoving coal into the engine, It's like you got to make sure, I guess, to maybe freshen that example, because of climate change and all, sun on solar panels. Let's do that from now on. I got to make sure the solar panel's in the right place. It's got to get more sun, right? So I need to get more sun longer. How much traffic am I getting, and can I get more traffic? So the KPI is where you focus the actions. That's the thing that one thing, doing that one thing, putting your effort, energy, time, and resources into that one thing will be the thing that moves the needle. But it instantly sort of shows itself because you're looking at all the performance indicators. Your KPI does not have to be complicated. And it's not what somebody else tells you the KPI should be. I'm not a believer in that. KPIs move around, they change, they're customized to your own user journey. When you understand measurement, that KPI question becomes so much easier to answer. It sort of just becomes a natural byproduct of using the system. All right, so to take a look at this sort of stuff, and I'm going to bring back our fancy-dancy spreadsheet here that I had up. So this is when we're forecasting. So where is my KPI right now? So I'm looking at, let's just take these 2 weeks in particular. Is the KPI, I'm expecting 30%, I'm getting 18%. Is the KPI the fact that I got 15%, 18 here, 15 and 9? Or is the KPI the average cart coming through? So in our case, the KPI is this number. So it's this percent to consider. That's what we're focusing on because that's what's broken. My average cart isn't broken. This week, and again, I'm realizing I'm only showing 2 numbers, but I have years of trend when it comes to the price line. So I understand how this is supposed to work, right? I've got lots of years of data showing how this particular user journey works. But I know that this week was just kind of an off week. It was an outlier. There wasn't an annual sale. If there was, it would have been right in line. This week kind of proves that point. There was an annual sale. Everything comes the way we want it to be. By the end of the month, because of enough trends and patterns, right, we do this week at a week, and we do this, by the way, all the way through the year. So for those of you who are thinking you can't possibly do that for the entire year, yes, you can. In fact, look, we do it for the next year as well. First quarter of 2023 is already forecasted out. So, and this is my favorite part, by the way, is you're watching this. This is recorded. I shouldn't say you're watching this, but this was recorded in January of 2022, right at the end of this week. Technically, when I'm recording this lesson, is January the 17th. So watch future lessons, or just, you can use Ask Instructor. Be like, hey, did you guys ever hit those forecasts? Like, how did that work? Because we do as we go through. This is why we use the system. But what this is telling us here, because it's consistently off, is that I got to work on this. I got to work on the people that are going from the offer to the cart, because that's what's broken right now. Now, remember, we know it's broken. We knew it was going to break because we were dramatically raising the price, making it an annual option versus the monthly option that was there. We changed a couple of things on this. So we knew it was going to break. That's okay, right? We had other promotions that it was tying into, so we needed to do that. But we're reworking the offer copy right now. We're changing the design of the page with the intention that it is going to be getting us closer to that 30% number coming through. So this is the key performance indicator that we care about. Everything else is just a performance indicator right now. Once we get this one fixed, there's going to be another one guaranteed. If everything works perfectly, it's going to be this traffic number that we're going to focus on, and how do we get more traffic coming up. So that's how this whole thing works when it comes to actions you're going to take, and that the numbers will actually guide us along the way, and especially when it comes to the thing like KPIs. And with that, we wrap up our third and final topic of lesson number 1, actions. Coming up next, we're going to review the entire lesson, Measurement Planning, the Foundations. We'll see you there. When your measurement plan wraps up with a review of lesson number 1, Measurement Planning, the Foundations. Remember, we talked about that one thing in the beginning of this lesson. What's that one new thing you either hear slightly differently, the one technique or tip that you can actually start using to build a skill? That's super important. Do not try to do every little thing that's in any of these lessons. It's just too much too soon. Build muscle. Every time you practice, you come back, and we hear this a lot, and it's because it's designed like this. People will say, wow, I watched this one lesson. I came back and I watched it 6 months later. I picked up more things. Guaranteed you will do that with this lesson, because as you have muscle, as you build your measurement muscle, you come back, you rewatch this, you will pick up another new one thing because you can see it slightly differently now. So that's why we build these lessons with layers, so that you don't get bored. All right. Talked about the framework. That was the big one thing. Remember, if you have not gone through it yet, as an Academy member, absolutely go through W.I.N, the Measurement Marketing Framework. It'll take you through this in intricate detail. And for the different stages, there's the cave stage, the valley stage, the summit stage, and you go through the framework over and over and over and over and over and over again. We've gone through it thousands of times ourselves. You should as well. Remember, we're both on the same path. You may have just started yours, or maybe you're just in the beginning stages of yours. We're just further ahead, but it's the same steps that we are walking on is where your feet are right now, at least your virtual feet. The topics that we covered, we talked about questions. The secret sauce to questions is results and how. That's the only 2 types of questions you ever have to think about. Focus on the results, focus on the how. And you keep doing that over and over and over again. And just like you saw that we did, we moved from asking results and how about sort of the customer journey to results and how on a specific page. We've actually built eyes on the journey reports for carts as well, doing the results and how stuff. So that results and how is all we're doing. And we get so good at asking results and how it becomes sort of an ingrained instinct after a while. So results and how is super important. If you just practice those basic skills, remember Karate Kid, wax on, wax off, it's kind of like that. You just practice results and how, all of a sudden you are naturally asking the exact right questions you're supposed to be asking. Information. When it comes to information, the secret to this is behaviors. It's not about the numbers. It's all about the behaviors. Now, of course, behaviors, when you measure them, they will necessarily present numbers because that's the measurement part of it. But behaviors is where you start. You always think about the behaviors. How many people are loading a page? Maybe staying on the page, going to the cart, purchasing, right? Think about the behavior that you're measuring for, not about the number it's going to produce. Then the actions. So the actions are really important because you're going to role play those ahead of time. And you think about this, if this, then not that, if this, then that. So if the number is higher than I want it to be, we're going to do this. If the number is lower than we want it to be, we're going to do that. If the number is right in that Goldilocks zone, it's in the sweet spot and it's right doing what it needs to do, then we're going to do this. So now you have 3 different actions that you've role played. Now you go into the report or Google Analytics or that spreadsheet or whatever the dashboard is that you're seeing that particular number. And instantly you already know what you're going to do. So that the second you are exposed to the number, you instantly start taking action. And everything becomes so much easier and so much faster and so much more of a needle mover, which is what everybody says. They want to need something that moves the needle. That's how you do it. All right, your next steps. Practice q.i.a. Remember, question, information, actions. When you start with questions, I would pick 3 to start, make 1 result and 2 hows. That's what I would start with if you're just starting out with this. So pick your 1 result, like revenue. Okay, how are you getting revenue? It's going to be transactions, going to be maybe average ticket. You might start with that. And then you go, okay, well, how am I doing those? And you go further deep. Well, in order to get transactions, I have to have cart views. Well, how are you getting cart views? Well, I need to have offer views. Well, how do the offer views happen? Well, I need to have, people sending impressions on Facebook or clicks on Facebook, and then impressions of the ad. Do we get the clicks? And it keeps going and going and going. And that's how you sort of build this out, right? We're keeping it very focused on kind of a few steps, but it goes on. There's a lot of results and how that you can do. So practice that. And you come up with all these different questions. And the way I think about this is like 3 columns. I have my questions column. Then I will have my information column. What are the behaviors that I need to measure for that will give me this answer? So whether if it's a transaction I'm trying to measure, then obviously the purchase is a behavior. I need to make sure I'm collecting e-commerce information or know where I'm going to get the e-commerce information from. If it's a cart page view, how am I going to get that page view measured? Google Analytics, and it's going to be a destination goal that I'm going to set up in Google Analytics, something like that. And then you add in the intention-based behaviors as your skills develop. In your beginning, you're probably not using, if you're not using Tag Manager yet, you don't have to use Tag Manager before you plan. You just plan, and then you plan for what you can do. So if all you can do is page views right now, because that's the easiest that your skills are, that's great. Do that. That's what we did. We quite literally started where you are, exactly where you are. And then as we built our measurement muscle, we started adding Tag Manager in. We could do the cooler things like 45 seconds and they do halfway down the page, or did they look at the testimonials for at least 27 seconds, like all of that crazy stuff you can do with Tag Manager, but it does take skill, but you don't have to have it. We were good at planning, we were good at building, and we were good at launching. And then we got better at planning, better at building, better at launching. Then we got even better at planning, better at building, better than launching, because we go through the framework over and over again. So always start with the basics, then you can add the intention stuff later on. When it comes to your actions, focus your actions on your KPIs. So when you think about, okay, all the different performance indicators that are there, I would think about what happens with if one's lower, higher, or exactly where it needs to be, what actions you would take. And then you have all that sort of planned out. When you look at your answers, you're going to see some of those steps are working just fine, just like you did with our spreadsheet when you saw that one. Some of them are working just fine, but some of them are not. And then when you see that, you're like, oh, bam, there's my KPI. That's the one I got to fix. That's the one I got to move the needle on, because if I fix that, the rest of the things fall in line. And if they don't, you will see the next KPI to focus on, and the journey continues. The better your plan is, the better the build goes. Remember, in the framework, we talk about planning with questions, information, and action. Then you go to build, where you define your results, you define your traffic, you connect together in a way so the traffic is telling a story of how traffic is connected to the results produced from that traffic. You cannot do a build without a really good plan. You can build, just won't be a good one. So, and many of you, that's what it is. You've got a build already that was never actually planned for. It was just sort of activated and turned on, and now you're trying to figure out how to use it, but there was no plan, so it's kind of chaotic. That's the issue with bad builds. They create chaotic reports. The better your plan is, the better your build becomes. Now, of course, if that's where you are, that's okay. Just go back to the planning stage. Don't be afraid to start over. I'm going to start with the plan. And then you might find that some things are easier to see now in Google Analytics because you had a plan for them in the first place. you might find that you need to improve your build because maybe you're not measuring for the certain behaviors that you really do need to measure for. In other words, the certain information you need to collect may not be there. And finally, remember that we're listening to the conversation. Again, we talk about this a lot in W.I.N, the Measurement Marketing Framework, which is why I emphasize that as a first W.I.N to go through because it sets the foundations for all things measurement marketing. But this idea of listening to the conversation, there is a very real conversation happening between the user and the website. The user at every single step that they take with your website. There is a conversation. If you think about it, you go to any website, you will hear yourself having that conversation. You will literally hear the words. So as you sub-vocalize what's going on in your thoughts and everything like that, there is a conversation happening. The better we are at measurement, the better we can listen to their side of the conversation so that we can adjust our marketing and keep that conversation going. It's all about listening and responding. Listening is measurement and responding is the marketing side of things. So that's the whole idea behind measurement marketing, and planning is a core step to that. With that, we will wrap up lesson number 1, measurement planning, the foundations. Coming up next, we're going to start moving it up a notch, and we're going to talk about using this technique called POD to measure specific behaviors on your sites. That is coming up in lesson number 2. With that, we'll go ahead and officially wrap this one up. Thanks for watching Win Your Measurement Plan, and we will see you on the next lesson. Take care. All right. For those of you that are here live, we'll go ahead and move on to our Q&A. Anybody on YouTube, by the way, just an FYI, we're not able to answer questions on the YouTube channel as much because we are taking all of our focus on the support for our Academy members. But any comments you have, would definitely appreciate and love seeing those. Okay, so if you have questions, go ahead and pop them into the chat now. And then Hans, I also see that you are here live as well. So Hans, I'm going to have you go first if you're willing and or able.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me, Mercer?
I hear you loud and clear.
Awesome. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, no problem.
You know, I know that you had the original one or a previous one like this back in 2020. And this, I have to say, is a more richer and more nuanced version. I guess that's to be expected since you do learn in a couple of years, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah, the last one was in 2019. So we knew this was coming due for a refresher. And that's why we refresh the W.I.N.s all the time. Exactly right. Because we try to make sure that we're staying up with the most recent thinking and different ways. Sometimes we teach it a little differently and figure, oh, this is a better way to teach it. So we go back and do that. But we always try to keep things updated back there.
Yeah, exactly. And in discussing or talking about the plan this time around, you know, there's this alphabet soup, right? Of ACE and IOJ and POD.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And it seems like we're stirring the bowl a little bit more now. You know, just talking about the plan. You know, we had talked about all 3 of these ideas: ACE, you know, Eyes on the Journey, and POD. Can you maybe just take a moment to unravel this a little bit and explain? You know, there seems to be some overlap right now between the 3 concepts. Perhaps you might take a moment to say how should we think about each so that we're not getting them confused, and when do we use them? Right?
Yeah, really good question, because you will hear that, right? We have our own sort of jargon as we're teaching this stuff and different techniques, and they're designed to help you to kind of shortcut, right? To say, oh, POD, okay, I know what that stands for and when to use that. So this idea of q.i.a first. So you will hear us mention q.i.a, that's q.i.a. That is the framework. And that's where everything starts on a plan. So the 3 keys to the planning step are questions, information, and actions, right? That's what we talk about. So the results and how questions, the behaviors that you're measuring for to be able to get you answers to those questions, and then the actions you're going to take based upon the answers that you get, doing all of that stuff ahead of time. Now, that's sort of the basic one, right? That's that q.i.a process. Now, the POD analysis, what we call the POD analysis, that is a technique that will help you to make sure that you have visibility into all the different behaviors that you have access to. Because sometimes you just don't realize. Like, I know I didn't for many years. I didn't know you could even measure if somebody was on a page for 10 seconds, right? Well, holy cow, how do you do that? I didn't even know that was a thing, right? So there are the POD analysis, which stands for purpose, offer, and details, which we'll talk about in lesson 2. But that helps us to go through and kind of give a little bit more of a structure to make sure that we have access to the information that we need. That's all that is. So it's a tool to use to help you with q.i.a. The IOJ report, that Eyes on the Journey, we typically call Eyes on the Journey. That's just a type of report, completely separate. Doesn't really have anything to do with planning itself. That's more of like a build. It's a result of a build coming through, just like your data studio report's a result of your build, right? So really, when it comes to planning specifically, it's q.i.a, right? This question, information, actions. That's it. That's the core foundation. As a way to help with information, we've created this little pod tool, pod way of thinking, I should say, that you'll hear about in lesson 2, where it goes into very specific steps you can take to make sure that the information there is that you're just aware, because that's half the battle, is being sure that you're aware of the information that's there, because that can help you when it comes to, okay, what specific things do I need to either set up in Google Analytics or set up in Tag Manager so it's listening for these certain behaviors as they come through. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yep.
Perfect.
What about ACE?
So ACE is specifically taught in the results section. So it's how we call ACE conversions, where you measure for, are they aware of a customer journey, right? Whatever the journey is that they're on, did they complete that particular journey? And then did they actually engage along the way? So that's what the ACE model is for. Again, it's a structure to make sure that you're measuring for the correct results, because in Google Analytics, what most people will do, which again, it's not bad, because technically I'd say most people don't even have goals, which is bad. But the ones that have goals set up in Google Analytics or a conversion event in GA4, they don't actually they just have the result. That's it, the end result. They haven't thought about the ACE model. And that's where we talk about, of course, you need to measure how many people completed that particular journey, but you need to also know how many people were aware of it in the first place, how many people engaged along the way, again, so that you understand the mentality of the machinery, like how the machinery is supposed to work. If it breaks, you're going to know exactly what step broke. So there's no drama to, if something goes down, which it will, things are going to change in the marketing. But when that happens, you go, oh, it's this step. Cool. We'll focus on this step and we fix this step because we know it's this step. And that's the idea of ACE. It's just another way to be able to say, measuring the different stages of a user journey.
Okay, so the ACE is what we use to help understand the results of the question that we're asking. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So specifically in the build step, remember, it's outside of the planning stage, right? But the build, when you go to Google Analytics and you're like, what's a goal I should set up? It will be ACE goals. You set up goals from when they're aware of the journey. You set up a goal when they complete the journey. You set up a goal that's somewhere in the middle as they're engaging. That's it. Yep.
Okay. Great. All right. Thank you.
No, you're quite welcome. Great question. All right. William, you're up, and then I'm going to go into the chat room right after that. If you're ready, you can just unmute and...
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Hear you loud and clear.
Fantastic. Happy New Year to everyone. My question is, when you went into the results area, you had your blog set up with the impression, interest, so on and so forth. Were those separate events that you set up, or were they graduated? Did you have to complete one step to get to the next?
So like these here?
When you went into Google Analytics, you had the events within Google Analytics?
Yes. Yep. So I go to the events. And in the events, we went into pages, and then we were going to see all the different events that are happening on that particular page, in this case, the Academy. So, and then we went into the journey. So this is the part where the different, impression, introduced, interested, investigated, initiated, this part.
That's correct. Yes, sir.
Perfect. So what we did is we set up the system so that and this is using Tag Manager, we did this, right? So again, we're assuming a little bit you have that skill. And if you don't, if you're listening to this, you're like, I don't use Tag Manager yet. That's okay. You should, and you will. But start with where you are, which is fine. But with Tag Manager, we basically said, when the page loads, fire an event that says an impression of that page just occurred. Then 10 seconds later, fire another event that says introduced. And then 10 seconds, or if they've been there 45 seconds later, check to see if they've scrolled at least halfway. The second they have also scrolled halfway, and both those things are now true, 45 seconds and 50% scroll, then fire the interested event. If they have stayed on the page and they're investigating the offer for at least 4 seconds, then fire the investigated event. If they click on the actual button to go to the cart, then fire the initiated event. That's what we did. So we're measuring for very specific behaviors. And then when Tag Manager is sort of like listening for those in the background, when it happens on that page, it tells analytics that it happened.
Okay, got you. All right, I just wanted to make sure.
Does that make sense?
Because I was getting it confused with goals and events, but I think I understand exactly.
This is another way, because remember, at the end of the day, like truly, all we're doing is results in how over and over and over again, right? In the super most generic way of thinking about it. So the result is the initiated. Here's how we're getting them to initiate. The result is a completed sale. Here's how we're getting them to complete that sale, right? So that's all this is. The ACE goal stuff is in the acquisition. I needed a way. So now this helps me very specifically answer a very specific question, which is what is the customer journey on a single page? In this case, the Academy page, right? It's just this page is all it's measuring. It doesn't measure anything else in the journey, just the behaviors on this particular page. It's custom built for a very specific reason, right? This stuff, when I go into acquisition and then all traffic and then source medium, this is where the goals come in. And this is why it's important to set goals, because different reports in Google Analytics will use the goals, whereas other reports won't. Like that events report doesn't use goals at all. So, but now that I have my goals set up and I just did simple destination goals. Like when this URL shows up, this is the Academy saying it's now loaded, right? This is how many people have been exposed to the Academy offer, right? Aware of the customer journey that is now the Academy. This is how many people completed the journey, which is that third step, right? That's why it says number 3 here. So I know it's the third step in the ACE goals, and it's the purchase in this case. When they complete is our completion, in this case for this journey, is a purchase. In the Toolbox membership, the completion is the thank you page after they opt in, right? So it's different journeys. That's why you customize it for each journey. But the idea is the same, that you can see that we're in multiple ways. As you learn measurement marketing, you'll see multiple ways of basically just making sure that you know what your results are and how you're getting those results so that you understand what your marketing machinery is doing. Because when you have visibility into that, it's so much simpler because you see the gear that's kind of clunking for some reason now all of a sudden, and now you can go focus on it because you see it. Most people don't see it. They just see the result not there anymore. And they go, well, crap, what happened? And it's like if a car breaks down, it's like, what happened? I don't know. Maybe the back seat is set wrong, right? And you would go, well, that's not true. The back seat has nothing to do with the car not starting, but that's because you know how a car works, right? But if you don't know how a car works, maybe that's why. Like you don't know, right? And so that's the concept. Once you understand how your marketing works, it becomes much easier to actually manage and improve and grow that marketing. Does that help?
Yeah, it helps very much. The events, so in that particular case, you wanted to measure behavior so you can answer some questions. And this goals here kind of answers the goals that you set up, kind of answer the ACE part of it.
Exactly right. So one is set up to measure the entire customer journey of the funnel through the different steps of the funnel. This is the different stages of a particular step. This is like almost like a zoomed in on what's going on this particular step. In this case, just the offer page. Mm-hmm. That's exactly right.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
Good question. All right, so now let's go back and we're going to take a look at the chat room here. Lots of people saying, yeah, you just described my tag manager analytics and no plan. It's normal. Guilty of being one of those posts, writing those posts. Not a problem if you've ever written, these are the questions that are important. So I could think it is. It's important. It gives you, for me, it's like inspiration. I don't mind those. It's like inspiration, but just don't copy and paste. Okay, so Zita's asking, with the click-through rates you have on the slides, between the different stages, the offer card, the thank you. So I'm going to bring this back up here. Generally apply to most businesses, or do you have to figure this out individually? This is such a great question. So this is around forecasting, right? So in the framework, we talk about forecasting step. So when you build, you have a plan. The plan leads to a better build. When you've got a nice build that's naturally telling a story, it's much easier to listen to the conversation that's happening, right? That's the whole point. Now, when we get our benchmarks from that, that's what can start to help you build your forecasts. And you will, when you're listening, the secret sauce of listening is trends and patterns. So when you see those trends and patterns, you can start to sort of lean back a little bit on those trends and patterns. You can rely on them to basically be there next week, next month. So your recent past can inform and tell you what's coming up for your near future as you go through. So because those trends and patterns are trends and patterns for reasons, because they're going to continue, right? Barring any major changes. They sometimes change, of course, but that's the idea. So when we're coming through here and we're looking at this was because of trends and patterns that we saw. Our goal is 8 to 12% for this step, because we know, and what we have found, this is what we have found, most direct response models, which is what we are, where it's an offer page, goes to a cart page, goes to a thank you page of some sort. Most in that particular step, offer to cart, typically is 8 to 12%. That's what we look for. We have done this for a wide variety of industries, and that sort of tends to be the pattern. Now, 8 to 12% of that, and 30 to 40% or 45%, depending upon the cart. Sometimes a little higher on the carts. That's totally fine. You might have a cart that's just doing a little bit better than that, but you don't see 100% with cart through rates, right? Not 100% of the people who go to a cart buy. Just they naturally go away. So if you get a 50% cart through rate, I'd be like, that's fine. And then what'll happen is when you get these house steps doing 8 to 12% here, and like in our case, 30 to 40%, you naturally end up with your overall conversion rate of 1 to 3%, which is also kind of a standard. We typically see cold traffic converting at 1 to 3%. Then we see typically warm traffic converting between 5 and 10%. So an interesting way to think about this is like webinar traffic. Like I was talking to a client just a couple of days ago about this. So their webinar, they're saying, well, our webinars convert at 10% and it's cold traffic. It's like, but it's not, because when they measure 10%, they're measuring offer page to purchase, right? From offer to purchase, and it's 10%, which is great, but it should be between 5 and 10% because it's a webinar. So before they saw the offer, they were warmed up for an hour. They know about the product, the brand, the service, the people, whatever. They've been warmed up, so they should convert more. Then what I did is I said, well, let's go back to figure out what that number is for if you measure the top of that customer journey, which is the registration page for the webinar. And it turns out it's actually 1% of the people who see that registration page end up buying, which again, just justifies the point of the whole 1 to 3%. Like that's just what it tends to be. That doesn't mean that yours will always be like this. I think it's important to TBV, what we call trust but verify, because you might have an outlier case. They're just very, 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 very rare. As an example, we would have an outlier case when we do reverse flash sales. So with the Academy, you may have seen this already, or if not, you certainly will in the future. We do raise rates. I never, ever, ever want to put any of you in a position where you ever have to say, man, I wish I'd waited to buy the Academy because the deal just got better, which is why I despise Black Friday deals when somebody that I paid $97 for somebody's course and like a month later, they're like, it's only $7 today. And I'm like, I just feel ripped off, right? Phone companies do it to us all the time with cell phone plans. They just reward the new customers, but they just, don't focus at all on the existing customers. And those are the people building the company. They should be rewarded, as should you. So when you have an Academy rate, whatever your rate is, you are locked in. And for as long as you keep that rate or your account active, you keep that rate forever, as long as you keep it active. So when we raise rates, we will have what we call reverse flash sales. So we tell people, listen, in 3 days, the account's going up. If you're on the list, you know about it. And that's the reason we tell people, because we want to reward people for being part of the list. And I understand sometimes people are just waiting for a reason to buy. And, we want to tell them. I would not like it if I found out when I was like, oh, I'll buy it next week. And then I come back to buy it next week and all of a sudden it's 3 times the rate. I'd be like, man, I wish they would have told me that. I would have bought it sooner. So we think it's a service. We tell people about that. But what happens to our conversion rates? Are they 1 to 3%? Are they even 5 to 10%? Nope. They're like 25 or 30%. But we know they're going to be, because it's at that point, it's not even warm traffic, it's hot traffic. Like our cart rates are going to be like 75, 80% cart through rate on those weeks, because it's a very short period of time that we do that. We know that they are coming in hot. They are coming in to buy. They already know the value. They probably have known the value for a while. They just didn't have a reason to buy, and we're putting that into a 72-hour window. So we change the result that we're looking for because the environment changed a little bit. So hopefully that makes sense in terms of how to think about that. But so it is a combination of you initially guess, and you can use best practices like we are, like you can use our numbers for now if you want, but you guess, and then especially if you're just starting out, and then you measure against your actual results. Like quite literally, if I was doing this from day one, I would guess and be like, well, I think it's going to be this, and I think this percentage will create that, and I think this percentage will create this for this average ticket. Then I measure against actual to make sure that my actual is getting close to my guess. And if I start to see a pattern where like everything was all of a sudden 5% with cart through rate, I'm going to start changing my forecast and say, well, you know what? Next week's probably going to be 5%. Unless the marketing department, who also looks at this, comes in and says, 5%, that's not good. Let's go work on the cart. And they start taking actions that should lead it to do at least a 15% or 20%. And you can see that we've actually forecasted the cart is not going to be the main focus. We're going to be focusing on the offer page. Then what are we planning for? You can actually see this in our plan. We're planning on improving the cart. So by the 14th, middle of February, that cart has adjusted in some way, shape, or form so that it's getting bumped up. And then you can see as I fast forward throughout the year, all of a sudden, what are we in? August here. So now we've got 35% for the offer to cart rate here, and we've got 35% for the cart to thank you page, and the average ticket's higher. So it's like, okay, well, that makes sense. Like you can see in our plan that where we're trying to get to. And then of course, we'll just, as we measure the actual results, we'll know if we actually hit it or not. But hopefully that gives you kind of an idea of how that works. And if not, feel free to pop back into another question. So Vinny is asking, so if you're working with communities that are off platform, or you're trying to measure intentions with community members that you can't measure specific behaviors, how would you go measuring a community generated lead? Any other way but UTMs? I mean, you could have specific pages, I guess. So I get, it's a little tougher to say. I don't know the ins and outs. I know like if you have, there are certain things that you cannot measure for legal reasons, like HIPAA stuff, right? Like that's why you can't build retargeting audiences of people with like dermatitis or something, because Google doesn't want to know that, and you know it's against HIPAA compliance and all that. So there are some things where maybe you can't measure to the detail that you want, but can you tell, for example, somebody's interested in health? Probably. And so that's, if I can't tell if they have dermatitis, but I can tell if they want, you know, and again, not a HIPAA compliance expert, not in the health and fitness industry, but let's say 7 tips to get great look, 7 foods to eat to get great looking skin. I might do a blog post around that. And that blog post, I would then build a retargeting audience, because those people might have dermatology, they might have acne. I don't know, but at least I know they're around skin, healthy skin, so it's not a specific medical condition. So that's where it's like, if you can't get to a specific, just an example of how you can't get to a specific thing, but maybe a more general way is what you might have to do. Keep in mind, general is not bad. As long as you have trends and patterns, even if you can't get down to a very specific measurement, you can still use the trend and pattern. That's all you need to be able to move that forward. So hopefully that makes sense. Jessica was asking, so should you make an educated guess? 100%, yes, around the forecasting. Yep. In fact, anybody who has got the basics set up and you're comfortable with your plans, your builds, WI.N forecasting revenue and results will cover that. WI.N the measurement marketing framework also covers forecasting at the different stages: how to forecast when you're in the cave, how to forecast when you're in the valley, how to forecast when you're in the summit. But it's guessing. When you first start, you guess. We did that last year. In fact, I did this in the WI.N the measurement marketing framework, because it was right around the time that we were recording that class. We had just done our very first boot camp. In that case, it was for Google Data Studio dashboards. And we had to guess. We'd never done a boot camp before. So we literally guessed. And then we measured against our forecast. And of course, when we do our next boot camps, we have 3 of those coming up this year, we're going to have the previous boot camp that will help feed these new forecasts. So we're going to look at those, and then the more boot camps that we do, the more we start to understand how boot camps are operating, or what we can get them to do. But you're exactly right. Start with a guess, and it's totally fine. Don't be afraid of being wrong. Measuring forecast, or measuring your actual results against your forecast, teaches you a ton. All right. Let's see. Vinny has given a little bit of context. Lots of clients working with having issues on their sites with the Value Summit. It's getting hard to reconcile community generated leads as a result. Generally, community metrics are way too high or way too low in reference to behaviors. Okay, not quite sure exactly. The only thing I can think of is, so you've got communities coming in, communities that are bringing leads into your website, other than UTMs, maybe just specific pages. You might put specific parameters as a way. Again, I don't know if that'll exactly work for you, but you'll see this when we do this on ours. If you look in our nav, on the Measurement Marketing Academy. So I'm just hovering over here. So look down in the lower left-hand corner of the screen down here when I do this, or you can just do this at home. But when I go to the Measurement Marketing Academy, you'll see it says ref equals nav at the top of that. That lets us know that when they click on that link and they load up the Academy page, it's because they came from the top nav. And if I do it down here, where I hover over that link, you'll see it says ref equals nav B. That way we know they came from the bottom nav. The reason we did that was because we wanted to be able to measure for the behavior of, are they clicking in the nav or not? Because we asked the question, like, do we even need to have a bottom nav? Should we have a big mega footer? Is that even useful? Because we were running out of space on the top nav for things, because top nav is pretty good real estate, right? So that's sort of how we went about that. Let's see. And then Ron was saying the reverse offer was great. Yeah, the reverse flash sales. Yes, thank you. I'm glad you were able to take advantage of that. And there are people who took advantage of it for years and years, which is awesome. But that's what I love. I love that. I think more companies should reward their existing buyers. And so we're trying to do that ourselves. And then Hans, you had another question, so feel free to unmute.
Yeah, so just one last quick question.
Sure.
You had mentioned towards the end of your spiel there that we should aim for one result question and maybe a couple how questions to go along with that.
Mm-hmm.
So the question then is, if we're targeting, or if we're coming up with 2 how questions, how can we isolate one from the other so that we know which question is working, like in an A/B test, for instance?
Can you give me an example of like what that what you're getting a little more details about maybe a particular customer journey you have in mind?
Well, let's see here. Okay, let's say that the result is that I want to sell a book. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and so the two how questions might be, um, how do they go from introduced to interested? And the second how question might be, how do they go from initiated to actually purchasing?
So do you have the journey of the book? Like, what is the actual journey? They come to the page and then they go, is it like a free plus shipping offer, or is it like go buy the book on Amazon, or is it buy the book from me and there's a cart page for the book?
Yeah, so basically there's a cart page for the book, and they would just purchase, from the website, from
Okay.
the offer page.
So something more like, where there's a specific offer, there's a specific cart, there's a specific thank you page.
Sure.
Kind of how it is. So if that was the case, I'm just going to flip in and see where I can find that. I think I have that, maybe not. I'm going to go back and find those real quick. So just to make it easier. So there we go. So if this is your basic customer journey, the first thing to do is I would not start with interested and investigated, because it's more complicated stuff. It's like talking about like what color the carpets are going to be and how you're going to paint the walls, but there's no foundation built for the house yet. It's like, that's not the important question right now, right? You focus on the foundations. So the first thing you would do is make sure that you've got this stuff figured out. The result of your funnel, how many people bought the book, how many people saw the cart, how many people saw the page. That's it. So I would start with this. Start with this result, then this result, then this result. Then what will happen? Again, this should be a natural process. And I want to emphasize this for not just for you, but for everybody. It's like, because the tendency is you see all this cool stuff that people are doing, and you go, cool, I just need to do these 1.5 million things, and then I'm also going to have their same setup, which is true, but you're never going to get through the 1.5 million things, because you'll get to the point where it's just busy, 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 but no progress. And so it's important to make progress. It's really important to be good enough to get going. And for years, we didn't have an eyes on the journey. We didn't even consider it, right? It was just, how do people see it? What's this result? This how to lead to this, and then this how to get to that how. And that's it. So start with the basics as we're going through. And then what'll happen is, once you got these down, because you've built that muscle up, you will eventually start to see this problem where there's not enough people going from offer to cart, or there's a weird number here where this conversion rate's off. And you're like, well, why? Why is that happening? And that's where the eyes in the journey comes through. And you start going, okay, what's the result of the offer page that we want? Well, the result is to get them to click, and then the cart page loads. So the click is the result, and then we backtrack it from there to figure out the how steps. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
But start with the basics. Like, if you aren't measuring the basic sort of step 1, step 2, step 3 in the overall customer journey, don't worry about eyes in the journey yet. You're not ready for the eyes in the journey yet. Focus on getting those core steps, because the eyes in the journey is a very detailed view about a specific step, because now you're asking specific questions to diagnose why this specific how step is not working. But if you don't have that how step set up yet, there's no reason for an eyes in the journey yet. It's just going to be information, but not necessarily useful, or as useful, I should say. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. That helps.
Cool. It's a really, really good question. And I'm really glad you asked that, because that is the tendency, is you see this stuff and you're like, oh, I'm going to set up my eyes on the journey report. But, definitely just get good enough to get going, get the basics in play first. And if you go through, Win the Measure Marketing Framework, it should set that up where it's like, do the cave first. Like, Eyes on the Journey is a valley/summit style report, depending upon what you're trying to measure for. So get your cave style setups good enough to get going versions first, then you come back, make them better, make them better, make them better. And you might get to a point where you don't need an eyes on the journey, like for something, because you just don't need it. That stuff happens quite a bit.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Good question. Okay. And then Adrian said, the Nav UTM story sounds interesting. So I think it's possible if you know what you're looking for, where to start finding it. It's exactly right. But to emphasize the point, we didn't just brainstorm as a team and be like, oh, should we add, I don't know, how about adding parameters so we can answer this question? It was, we had the question first. We went through q.i.a. That's how we did it. So this is like in the tech world, they say eating your own dog food. That's what we're doing. We're the stuff that we're teaching is exactly what we do. for our own brands, actually multiple brands. We do it for Measure Summit. We got a couple other brands we work with that are outside of measurement, and we do it for all of those brands. So we think about the questions we're trying to answer. We think, well, how are we gonna be able to collect that information? And we'll come up with the pod. We use pod to do that, and that's what helps us with the parameter stuff. So we'll talk more about that in lesson 2. And then finally, it's okay, what are we gonna do based upon these answers? Because sometimes, and I should have mentioned this in the action step, this is a little bonus for the Q&A, sometimes you will get an action that's kind of hard to nail down. And then you might realize, like, this is a bad question. We shouldn't be asking this. So for example, we had a student who asked, they wanted to know how many people were or what paragraph number were they clicking on in an email? Because you can use UTMs for that technically. So so they're like, well, how many, which paragraph are they clicking on in the email? Was it paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6? For all their emails, they just wanted to know this, like all of them. And then they were going to do, how are they going to collect it? They're going to collect it because they're going to use UTMs, and that's going to give them the information they need so they can measure that. And then they were talking about the actions. They're like, we're not quite. And so I asked them, they actually didn't ask the action question. So I asked them, I said, well, let me ask you a question. What happens in 6 months when you get a report that number says, hey, paragraph number 3, it's amazing. What are you going to do? And they were like, actually, we don't know what you would do with that. And I would concur with that. I have no idea what I would do with that. Doesn't mean anything, because you have to go like, well, is that because it was a short paragraph, a long paragraph? Were there some emails that didn't have a paragraph number 3? I don't even know. It's not useful. So they realized they were measuring for measuring's sake. And so when you tie something to an action, it keeps you from measuring things. Another huge pro tip, if you're not the one who's necessarily coming up with these questions, sometimes we are forced to come up with a report because somebody's asking us to do it, right? You got a stakeholder or your boss or something like that, or a client. And so you have to generate this report, but you still go through q.i.a. So you define the question, you think about the information that you need to measure to make sure you get the answer, but then you ask them, hey, what actions are you going to take based upon the answers you get? Like, what if it's too low? What if it's too high? What do you do if it's just right? This helps me to make sure that I'm measuring and giving you exactly what you need, right? That's how you phrase that to them. And then they will come back and they'll say, well, actually, we're trying to do this. And you might realize, oh man, I'm so glad I didn't build that report, because that report's not going to help them. What they really need is this instead. Or maybe you have a better way to help them get to that action. So it's a really, really important thing. All right. So then Dee was asking, is the viewer showing here done with Data Studio? Yes, this is all Data Studio. Yep. And Vina had already put that in there. So thank you for that. Just to say, I'm so guilty about measuring to measure, trying to refocus on 2022. It's a thing. I 100% agree. The idea of measuring for measuring's sake is standard, because once you find out what's possible, you want it all. And this is the problem with big data, because it's so easy to get data. That's why it's so big. But it's there's something called dark data, where the concept is, if you think about an iceberg, the data that you see, like in analytics and whatever, and it's like the little tip of the iceberg, and there's all this other data that's being collected just because people could, but they're not actually doing anything with it. So you only end up doing stuff with the tip of the iceberg stuff. And that's kind of our focus. It's like, no one's got time to sort through big data. Like, I get it. You should have data. Don't get me wrong, but it's data with a purpose. And then as you need the next level, you then improve your build for that level. That's why in the journey, we talk about the walking through the cave, you're bicycling through the valley, you're helicoptering from summit to summit to summit. Walking is very simple to do. Bicycle, it's a little more complicated, but fairly easy for most to master. A helicopter, that's a whole other animal. That's a very complicated thing, and your setups will improve and they get more complicated over time as you build your muscle. So that's how that particular works. All right. Well, appreciate that. Thank you, Jessica and Adrian, for those, and Hans, a nice tip. So with that, we'll go ahead and officially bring out the call. I actually got one more tip. I just want to make sure one more question here. So it's fascinating. Taking the time to come back to things you should already know causes you to rethink. 100%. That's a really good point. As Vinny was putting in the chat about, like, yeah, it's kind of every time you come back and revisit these basics, right? Like, if you've been an Academy member for a while, that's why it's important to go back and rewatch a win, because you will hear me say things like, find one thing, and you would have thought, hey, I got this, and you'll still pick up something else because you hear it slightly in a different way, or maybe you're able to hear it in a slightly different way now. Because again, your measurement muscle has changed. You're going to look at your worlds differently as you improve measurement, which is why it's occasionally important to go back and get a little refresher and why the Academy is there for you for all of those. All right. Well, with that, we will officially wrap it up. Anybody watching this free episode on YouTube, just wanted to, listen. This is it. Lesson 1 is the free one. Everybody else gets the rest of them. So definitely take a look at the Academy if this is of interest for you. You'll see the link in the description. Otherwise, those of you that were here live, thank you. This is awesome. I love the interaction, and thank you for being here. We will see everybody tomorrow. And then if you are watching the replay, just make sure that you use Ask Instructor Support and reference this particular lesson, and we'll be sure to get your answers there for you. So with that, we'll officially bring it to a close. Thanks again for watching Win Your Measurement Plan. We'll see you on the next lesson. Take care.
Recording stopped.